Hello again. Now, environmentalists and scientists have deplored Britain for approving its first coal mine in 30 years. They view this as a hindrance in the fight against climate change. The UK has been urging other countries to do away with fossil fuel and switch to clean, renewable energy. The controversial mine will supply steel-making industry and is expected to create about 500 jobs in the country. Our UK correspondent Julia Chapman is joining us now from London. Julia, a very good afternoon. Quite a controversial move, and I'm sure there's been a lot being said in the UK about this, although we understand the coal from the mine is not going to be used for power generation, but for steel making. It is pretty much a surprise.
It is indeed. The last deep coal mine in the UK closed in 2015, so green lighting a new one in this year, 2022, is certainly a surprise for many, not least because the UK has been calling for other countries around the world to reduce their dependence on coal, primarily as an energy source, which is not what this is about. But certainly environmentalists say this is a step backwards in the wrong direction and will not help the UK reach its climate goals, aiming for net zero by 2050. Now, the government says that this is a very specific coal mine. It will be producing coking coal for steel production. The steel industry has been moving away from coal over the years, but some of it still does depend on coal as a fuel source for these plants around the UK and elsewhere in Europe, where the government here says it will also be exporting this coal. It is insistent that this will not actually affect the emissions from the UK overall, because it will mean that simply the UK steel industry imports less coal or less steel is imported from other countries, effectively saying that if it wasn't the UK that was doing this, other countries would take up the slack.
Why is it not a solution just to import the coal?
That is a very good question, and one that many environmentalists are asking. But the question really hinges on the fact that it would be boosting British jobs, boosting the British economy. This is a £165 million investment in the UK economy. As you said, it will produce about 500 jobs in the northwest of the country, an area that has struggled with unemployment and that has a slower rate of economic growth than other parts of the country. So there are certainly those that welcome this as a renewed investment in an area that has suffered over the last few years. But others are saying that, well, there certainly can be new jobs created. Why do they have to be in these types of fuel? Why not in renewable energy sources instead? There's been a lot of criticism, not just from environmental groups, but from opposition politicians. All the opposition parties in this country have come out against this move and said that the UK needs to be a campaigner for cleaner sources rather than those like coal, which do huge damage to the environment.
Yeah, this is quite interesting because from what you've said, the steel industry itself has been relying less and less on coal, but has been moving towards hydrogen. So how has the government defended the fact that the single biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is coal? And no matter what you're going to do, if you're going to be mining this coal and making it into a coking coal for the steel industry, it has to burn somehow. How are they saying they're going to mitigate the emissions?
They haven't actually given an explanation on that count. There are still a lot of questions around this. And although the government has green-lit the project, there are expected to still be major legal challenges ahead, which could yet prevent this from ever actually getting off the ground. Previous projects in the UK in this field of fracking have been stopped by legal challenges and protest movements. We've seen some opposition protests outside of the firm that is going to be responsible for this potential mine in the northwest. They are expected to visit the site itself tomorrow and hold further protests. Still a relatively small protest movement, but this is still perhaps the early stages of this project. So undoubtedly the government will be trying to explain its position going forward, but what it seems to hinge on really is that if the UK wasn't doing this, someone else would be as well, and therefore it isn't actually creating any more emissions, it's just moving them to this country instead.
Yeah, so the story is not over yet, and the mood generally on the ground, I don't know if you've been able to gauge the sentiment of British citizens?
Well, we haven't been speaking to any today on this note, but undoubtedly the UK as a whole is really moving towards becoming a more sustainable country. Of course, the UK hosted the COP26 climate change summit last year in Glasgow, where it went around the world campaigning for countries to do better, to become more ambitious in their efforts to reach net zero emissions as soon as humanly possible. There is definitely a very big movement here in the UK to become a more environmentally friendly country. But it is also coming at the same time as there are serious energy challenges in Europe, particularly as well in the UK, all related to the war in Ukraine, the rising cost of energy, which is really hitting people in their pockets here in the UK. Costs rising across the board in food prices as well as energy. So there are a lot of major challenges, and there are fears that in an answer to some of those challenges, the UK may be rolling back some of its promises to maintain a climate-forward attitude in this country. Now, of course, this particular coal plant isn't going to be generating energy for the UK grid. Some would say if it was, it might be more justifiable. But undoubtedly, we will see more of this play out in the weeks to come and get a better understanding of what the broader UK public thinks of this decision.